Right, hello, welcome to the Sisyphus Complex Solution. This is still episode 172, and this is going to be part 5. Now, before I do go into the next phase of looking at this military strategy review, when I start to look at that one properly, I'll be dealing with some land-based matters. But there is an aspect that sort of leads on from the naval side that I was looking at last time in the last part, that then sort of leads into discussions around maritime law that I think demands some attention, because like I said, there are a lot of people that are referring to things around maritime law at the moment, and over the last few years in particular, where I do have a great deal of suspicion that they haven't got a single clue what they're talking about. As per usual, somebody literally just says something and then everybody just sort of does the nodding dog routine. This is obviously quite relevant to the events of the past week, with old Vichy boy making his presence known in the country, and then Mr. Traitor Appeaser and that doing exactly that as per usual. So let's move into the first part of this then, in terms of this maritime law. There are effectively two clauses that we need to be paying attention to. And just to be clear here, and that maritime law is something that does have a lot of historical reference. However, as per usual with these things, the United Nations decided that somehow they're the arbiters of all such laws now. So if you want to look for the maritime law, it is held under the United Nations Convention of the Law of the Sea, under the current system. Links in the description as always. So the parts that we need to be paying attention to. Firstly, we can look at clause 7, and what's most often referred to, which is the subsection relating to the duty to render assistance. This is obviously in regard to dinghy boys. Now, there are a couple of stated scenarios whereby the first one includes 3 separate conditions. Quite importantly, directly beneath this duty, we also get something that is called the prohibition of the transportation of slaves. Quite important, as I said. So understand that this is absolutely and directly related to the defence of our nation. When you have people invading the country, I don't care what the means are, it's called an invasion of the country. For people that have not been invited here, they have not taken any legal method of entering into our country, that's called an invasion. So therefore it is a matter of national defence. So let's run through this in regard to our now long-running invasion. So in terms of the 3 parts, A, no, they are not lost. B, merely being in a dinghy doesn't qualify as distress. Then we have to be very careful as to where exactly any so-called distress actually occurs, because if it hasn't happened in our waters, it's not our problem. They also don't collide. Why have I got collide? Oh, right, yes. In terms of part C and that, bumping into other stuff and that, having collisions, they're certainly not colliding with anything else. And then at the same time, they also don't have any flag of recognition, no ship name, no proof of registry. None of these things have been put in place, which are supposed to be there in place for the rules of the sea. There are largely areas where no case can be made for our obligation to just taxi them over. That is not a rule of the sea. Having the RNLI or any other form of assistance, there is no obligation on the part of the UK to be going out there and then effectively becoming this taxi service. So this nonsense of according to maritime law does not work. There's only one possible exception, and that is this claim about being in distress in our waters. I have never seen more than possibly one or two cases of how that might have actually been applicable. But then there's still a problem in terms of any dinghy that does signal distress when it reaches our waters. Because again, once they bring up this maritime law as the excuse, it does not stand up. You have to put this into the context of, first and foremost, this prohibition of transporting slaves. Then what you need to understand is, in episode 162, called Mobland, I ran through precisely why it is the legal case that's being put forward for these invaders is based on issues such as debt bondage. These are the claims that are being made also by the United Nations to explain what's going on with all of these migrants coming through. They're claiming it is all based off of like trafficking gangs, therefore debt bondage, etc., etc. If you take those specific points then, and once again I've included the relevant document that comes from that UN office for drugs and crime that stipulates all of these so-called conditions that these so-called migrants and refugees are coming over on, that would mean by default any of these people under the conditions that they have claimed as being under debt bondage, they are then classified as slaves. If you are coming into the country under slave conditions, whereby after entrance you then have to be sending back money because of the trip that you've now been obliged to pay back, you are then under this debt bondage, therefore slavery. What that means is the French authorities are in direct contravention of this prohibition of the transportation of slaves, because they are allowing it in full knowledge. And there's an example on the screen that the French police, the authorities, they just allow this to happen. So they are fully informed of what is going on, and they are enabling slaves to take to the waters to come to the UK. They know exactly what this is all about. So the French are acting as criminals, as part of this criminal human trafficking gang that we keep hearing about. You know, the gang that isn't an actual gang, it's basically just the governments. This maritime law nonsense as an excuse for being a taxi service, which is then by default also a human trafficking violation. None of their excuses add up. Not one. But there's a little bit more to this as well. Entering our waters is dependent on the right to peaceful passage. Once again, all part of maritime law. And the areas that I've highlighted here are being directly contravened. It is prejudicial for them to be entering our waters. It is a threat to our sovereignty and political independence for invaders to be invading our waters and our shores. We are being propagandised by the French because they are lying, along with our own government, who are lying, along with every other useful idiot and NGO and all of the other human trafficking line right throughout Europe, as per identified in the episode of Mobland. They are the ones that are the human trafficking gangs. That is the human trafficking system. and it does contravene our immigration system as well. The excuse of maritime law does not add up. None of their arguments add up. If I'm to turn around and say to people, like, you have to understand the arguments that they've made and be able to put it back to them, rather than just let them say things like, for example, we've had this issue that goes along with all of the rest of it. I don't think I've included it in the Mobland episode, but in a previous episode, you've had the no safe route. I proved that one to be bullshit as well, because nobody can explain to me the Julian Assange situation. If you are not able to claim asylum at an embassy, explain Julian Assange to me. That was a lie. It's all a lie. Maritime law is also not a legitimate reason for us to be allowing this invasion that France is enabling and sending in our direction. I'll be clear about it once again, because the knowing from all of the documentation that is available to all of these people in terms of the excuses that are being made to present what they think is a legal justification, all of it does not stand up in law, and they know that. That means they are willingly transporting slaves, by their definition, into the UK as an invasion force. France, once again, is our biggest threat and our biggest enemy, under the likes of the Vichy, which Macron is. They are quite literally, knowingly and intentionally breaching all international laws that they always want to go on about, the international laws, whenever it's convenient. But they are breaching all of these laws to harm the sovereignty of the UK. These are facts that are not being argued. All of the morons, whether it be Johnson, Sunak and now Starmer, they've been paying these Vichy scum to have our nation invaded. And by default, by playing along with that, that makes them treasonous to the nation. They will be acting with the enemy to the detriment of our nation. That is treason. This is about defence of the realm. This is the sovereignty of the people that they are attacking and constantly taking the piss out of by citing laws that do not at any point agree with the excuses that they are claiming it makes. They are just 100% doing the exact opposite of what the law says. This is an attack on UK soil, our land, our home, and I have got no tolerance for these whiny little ideologue bitches that didn't like the way that we voted in 2016, because that's what this is all about. Oh no, you voted for something we didn't like, so now we're going to be acting like criminals against you. That's what this is down to. And then obviously you can have the wider situation, which is being pushed in various other countries as well, because you've had the UN Global Compact on Migration, which is also a part of this sort of bastardisation of law. Which again, Conservatives signed up to it, Labour wanted it. The Uni Party acting against the nation, acting against the sovereignty of the people to enable an invasion of our country. The defence of the nation is against all enemies, domestic and foreign. and the Uni Party plus the European Union bureaucratic state are the enemies of the sovereign people of the UK. It's a simple fact, even based off of the bullshit that comes out of their mouths. These are traitorous scum. And we really, really, seriously, how the hell it is that we've had so many people that have been, all they can come up with, oh, we need to withdraw from the ECHR. What the fuck has the ECHR got to do with it? You're fighting a battle that is 10 steps away from the original problem. It's no wonder you're losing. If I can find these types of pieces of information, why can't all of these thousands of dumbasses claiming to be the experts and, oh yeah, we're going to push back, how can they not find this stuff? It's black and white. It's literally stated in black and white in the laws that are being pushed on everybody as an excuse. We have to bring them into the country according to maritime law. No, we don't. When we have people out there turning around and using stupid bloody excuses that are so completely removed away from what they should be arguing against, then those are people that cannot be trusted either. It's as simple as that. I find this stuff really bloody infuriating, as you might be able to tell. So, let's actually go into the next phase of this review, shall we? Which is, again, all supposed to be about being able to defend our nation. Right. I'll need to, in this particular part again, I'll also have to go on a tangent, because we can see with the chapter discussing land and the land-based capabilities, more commonly known as the army, how many of the general public are aware that the equipment capabilities of the army no longer exist? How many people understand that all of the equipment for the army was given away to the Ukraine? Let's be absolutely clear on that, because it's rather important to know the UK government, at the same time as enabling an invasion pushed over by Vichy French, they have left the defence of our nation from the army armless. That's precisely what it says in their own review. So the tangent I want to take, and kind of a policy suggestion to make alongside it, is based on this. This is the Misconduct on Operations from the Armed Forces Act of 2006. These are the kinds of actions that will see a serviceman being punished, including things like sleeping whilst on duty. What does not appear is punishment for politicians and commanders leaving their servicemen unarmed, and therefore by default leaving the nation undefended. Why is that? They will refuse to defend our waters. They'll refuse to defend our shores. They will invite an invasion into an undefended nation because they gave it all to a bunch of criminals in the Ukraine. Because you have to defend the Ukraine from an invasion, just not our own country. And was that really an invasion anyway, rather than something that was invited in order for them to conduct a big field test? We've got problems with the economy, and something that thankfully more and more people are speaking about now. But I've not heard anyone comprehend the full extent of the treason that is being committed against our nation by leaving us undefended. You seriously do not hate these people enough. So my policy suggestion is one that is actually quite obvious, and one that lefties should actually love, because all punishable acts by servicemen should apply to politicians and their commanders or superior officers. Apparently, you want equality? Let's have some of that equality. The treason part already applies, but let's see them live up to the same standards that they demand of our servicemen. Of specific relevance as part of this act, that they have, because they've abandoned the equipment the servicemen need to defend against the enemy, is literally stated within per subsection 2. Can't really do much if they don't have any weapons, can they? If you've not provided them with anything, how are they supposed to do anything? There's something else to consider here as well, because there has been talk of the potential civil war in the UK, largely coming from this Professor David Betts. And one of the things that causes some hesitancy amongst the wider public is the notion that once something starts, then firstly you're going to be in direct combat with the police authorities, but then they would be augmented with bringing the army in. So we would have the army on the streets in the event of some kind of civil war. That's something that gives cause for hesitancy. How effective is that going to be when the public understand the state of the army? How will it be when the public fully understand that the army is going to need to get ride shares and then stop off at B&Q to get some tools before they can do anything on the streets? Because they haven't been provided with any equipment, because it's all gone to the Ukraine. Not quite such a fear factor there then, is there? If anybody wondered why the hordes of Muslims that walk around our streets and that with weapons, only to be told to, oh, could you possibly please put them back in the mosque? If you wondered why those people were so emboldened, it's probably because they know this more than the rest of you do. Because they've got their own Muslim council thing and that, and inside the government, running the bloody Home Office. I think maybe it's about time the rest of the nation understood exactly what the state of play was. When you've got a fight being brought to your door, a strategy is to understand exactly what you're up against. And if one of the things is going to be, we might have a problem because the army will be put on the streets, so what? They haven't got anything. And according to a lot of what they're trying to do at the moment, most of them will be either soy boys or bloody women. How frightening is that? Careful what you wish for, government. Now, I've skipped past a couple of pages here because it would be a waste of my time to repeat their utter garbage. So I've moved on to their so-called recommendations. Well, I notice it says nothing about the fact that the army has no equipment. Rather like the failed folk singer in Brussels, old von der Leyen, a bit like she did to the Germans, with the caveat now being that well, there's two parts to it. I mean, in the first instance, and that the Germans not having guns is generally not that bad of an idea. But then, as I've already reported, apparently now we're supposed to pay for the German army to be armed, because that makes sense, doesn't it? We give our equipment away to the Ukraine and we pay for the Germans to get guns. We just allow an invasion. Okay. That aside, I don't care what the Germans do in Germany. I don't care what the French do in France. I don't care if they are run by Vichy. That's up to them. That's their problem. I care about what our idiots are doing. And this was a big part of what the Brexit vote was about for me. I like to see these things exposed, because there's been no greater exposure than what has happened since 2016. The fact that they think that somehow we're obliged to pay and pander for anyone other than the home nation. You have nations across the Europe, particularly within the European Union, the French and the Germans, I dare say there's a lot with the Spanish as well, and all manner of other countries, that they will do their utmost to see Britain fail, just because we don't want to vote in the same way that they do. We don't want their communist vision. And so they seem to think that they're entitled to start causing problems in our nation. And then our useful idiots appease it. This is what has been disclosed. And this is why this had to be disclosed. So then we can actually get some real men in charge. I care about this sort of situation because you get total nonsense in pretending that we can even do anything in terms of these so-called collaborations of NATO. This utter bullshit language that they come out with, the Ritchie strike. The fuck is that? Ritchie apparently means to find. Well, fucking say find then. This isn't about some bullshit Mediterranean bloody cooking program. You're making some salad where you have to get some Ponce fake chef to come onto the TV and use all silly foreign names for ingredients. If you want the military to understand what it is that they're supposed to be doing, you use English bloody words. Utterly retarded. Fucking Ritchie strike, morons. You can tell you get middle class totters, but they've got no fucking idea what they're talking about, writing this sort of guff. They want to change the number of servicemen between regulars and reserves, because apparently, they could then have a shared experience of having absolutely nothing to fight with, and probably having absolutely no idea who their enemy is supposed to be. Except for from the ideologues who'll turn around and say, no, the people of your home nation are the enemy. Somehow. They're supposed to be ready for some crisis with no equipment. This is so utterly retarded. And people need to be fired for this absolute abdication of the most basic of duties. If you didn't realise that I was not particularly happy about what I've been reading in this particular part this week, now you know. Now we look at the Royal Air Force. And I will say Royal Air Force because that is its proper name, not the air domain. Now, despite I will say Royal Air Force and that, but I do have a bit of an issue there and that in terms of the association with the the current monarchy, shall we say. Now, you know, if we're going to actually do things properly and that, and actually get an Englishman, if you want to have a monarchy, get an Englishman in there, not a German. Then it'll be a proper Royal Air Force. But that aside, from all of the bump and nonsense that we get on this side as well, we can just look at a couple of their bad interjections and start with the issues that we have in this Blue Box 14, where my attention is drawn to a constant referral to this Integrated Air and Missile Defence, or IMAD. God almighty. The issue I have here is, once again, they're using this as a basis of having to work in collaboration with others, such as this GCAP, which means the Global Compact Air Programme between the UK, Japan and Italy. You know, you can buy from others if need be, but I fail to see why we are completely unable to do these things on our own. Why is that the case? Command and control economy, perhaps? It then shifts into operational collaboration, which should absolutely not be the priority. Mention of a cloud-based system, presumably again because they think that that's something that sounds impressive, as opposed to just saying that they want some servers, and they'll probably want them placed somewhere else as well. As per usual, what I'm seeing here is nothing that remotely resembles a practical review. So here's the little job that they didn't do, which is to demonstrate what our actual current fleet looks like. Now, most people will probably look at this and that and have absolutely no idea whether this is good, bad or indifferent. And so in order for people to understand this, what you might want to do is make a bit of a comparison that is current. From this particular ranking chart, where I'll say up front as well that as per usual, I don't think that the numbers that they've got here in terms of units are actually correct, but nevertheless, let's point to Israel. Israel is ranked number 9 in the world. We are ranked number 11. If you use the exact same source that I've got on the screen here and that, I mean, and sort of navigate around to go directly to Israel, you'll actually find that they've got 605 units, not the 581, I think that says. Was it 600? I'm not going to put my glasses on, so. Anyway, and a variation of the numbers to give you an example as to why I've got a bit of an issue with that. But then understand that when it comes down to Israel, irrespective of this slight variation of the units, Israel has a population that is 14% of the UK. And that's based on the claimed number of the population, because I have actually pointed out before that the UK is probably considerably larger than the claimed number. Now, everybody wants to claim that Russia is the big threat. Russia is number 3 on the list, and they've got 3,677 units. If you look at the number of the nations that they enter into this ranking on the basis of different forces, so you'll have things like with America, they've got your Air Force, then you've got the Navy has got a fleet, you've got the Army that's got a fleet, so on and so forth and that. And most of them are very close to, if not better than, especially with the US, much better than what the UK has got. On that basis, if you was to put all of those numbers together for all nations across the whole of Europe, they still wouldn't match how many units Russia has got. Now, again, if we take official numbers, the UK has got a population that is 48% of the Russian population. Our claimed GDP is over $1 trillion higher than Russia. Our GDP per capita is 5 times the amount of Russia. Though granted, our debt is also 5 times higher. But just a simple logistical observation should be able to tell anyone none of this makes sense. You look at the population sizes, you look at the economy sizes, and how is it that a nation that has got 14% of the population of the UK has got a higher ranking than us? And then people wonder why do the Americans not have such a close friendship with Israel? I wonder. So when you're supposed to be doing a review, a strategy review, and an understanding as to how things stand and where we're supposed to be, where's any kind of analysis on this basis? Just curious. Then we get into things like the recommendations. Obviously we get some standard platitudes, such as actually, having some aircraft for carriers that don't work, and then increasing the fleet of F-35s in point 46. Point 47 is largely around crude and non-crude warning systems, and a rather strange call for A400Ms, which are basically the very large aircraft, the carrier aircraft, where for some reason they want this to be available for charter. I think they've lost focus on that one. Then in point 48 we get this emphasis on Bryce Norton. Been in the news lately, hasn't it? Currently commanded by this Louise Henton, who has been so good at her job that a bunch of scruffy Egypts with spray cans managed to get in and damage her aircraft. Woman power. This is the reason why you end up with the kind of idiot situation in the RAF and beyond. And once again, the review conveniently kind of failed to mention this kind of situation. But there is more that they've missed though, because in addition to, hating white men, it would be wise for them to actually have a bit of a brain fart and think, yeah, maybe putting white men back in charge would be a good idea. But a key component for our Air Force would be to ensure that we have ground defences that would prevent their assets being taken out before they can be used. And whilst I don't particularly like the guy involved, at least I found a question asked by Tobias Elwood in 2024, which gained this answer. I would say that this most definitely needs audit and a proper review. And in doing this, I have to then come back to Bryce Norton concentrations, because Bryce Norton is located in Oxfordshire. And whilst it may hold legitimate strategy as to where you keep your primary assets, the actual defence locations are most definitely not being maintained, insofar as I'm concerned. Military people out there, if you think that I'm wrong on this, feel free to let me know. You don't necessarily have to keep your high value assets at the locations where you maintain your ground-to-air defence systems. Because ideally you're supposed to be preventing the incursions that would be headed towards those assets. They have to be located separately. There are a number of locations around the UK that were historically made specifically for that purpose, and they've been shut down. They've been shut down because of this EU. Oh, we're all in this together. Stupid. Really fucking stupid. And it's also quite telling that one of those locations, which would be absolutely ideal, and I know a little bit about this because it's just down the bloody road from me, one of the first ports of invasion is this southeast corner. We used to have Manston. It was an Air Force base. Like I said, you don't necessarily have to have all your high value assets there anymore, but you should be maintaining a defence system there because it is so close to your shore. The ideal location to be able to launch defences. And now it's full of fucking refugees. Sorry, my mistake. Criminals of a human trafficking system. Full of that. That's how stupid things have become. I won't go into absolute full detail as to all of these kinds of locations and all of these kinds of the situations around that, because quite frankly, you want to make sure that those locations where you do have proper defence systems aren't widely spread all over the bloody internet. But the fact that they don't even remotely discuss that area means it's something they don't know anything about. When you've got a strategy review that is missing strategy, kind of makes it a bad document, really, doesn't it? So let's move into, I think this is going to be the last part of it, and that before I blow me top completely. Space. I mean, what you can say about this space domain is actually quite limited for the simple reason we're all mouth and no trousers in this area. They make 9 points before making some recommendations, but I see absolutely no need to go through their entire wish list. What is relevant is that they do begin with the dependence on satellites for the wider economy and how that applies to surveillance and tracking, where I will say that this is, first and foremost, this is not at the kind of level that people seem to think it is. I don't go full conspiracy theorist insofar as all that sort of nonsense is concerned. So the prime example that I think I've stated on several occasions before, anybody that is under the delusion that Hollywood has presented and saying, oh, your satellite systems and that it can deliver the kind of zooming down and following of people, tracking of people, like you saw in that film Enemy of the State. No. No, no, no. So when they're doing this kind of stuff and that, I mean, just at least get a bit of a grip on what the reality of the world is. I do take note from the point too of how there is little in terms of international rules relating to space. These are the people that want to go on about international rules, despite the fact that, let's go back to those maritime laws, shall we? Let's go back to those international rules, shall we? Do they apply? When you've got people that are turning around and saying, oh, well, we've got to have rules so we can bastardise them all the time. No, I don't think anybody should be even remotely concerned about the international rules. But we then get further lacks of sense in point 3, where they propose a guesstimate value of the market size, and then immediately suggest that some of that value includes exporting to the very people you're supposed to be defending against. Fucking retards. Within their limited recommendations, because they clearly know we don't have any real skin in the game here, they then have to jump to this Euro-Atlantic relationship. You know damn well that you want to desperately focus on the EU for this, but they are absolutely dependent on the US. Because in commie world, in both commie world and the amalgamation, the bastardization between the commies and the Vichy Nazis, command and control systems and that doesn't really produce much, as if it ever did. Precisely why we are so incapable in these areas is largely down to command and control economy and barriers to entry and lack of incentives. But obviously that's going to be a much wider economic discussion that's not really suited to this review. I do enough of that anyway. I'd also suggest that even if we did have any sort of competent independent infrastructure in space, the strategy would need to include risks that are actually nothing to do with enemies. You're probably more likely to end up with situations that are based off of natural factors. The obvious one that many people seem to be speaking about more and more and understanding more about are things like geomagnetic events. That should then, by default, in terms of a strategy, mean, okay, you need to have a backup capability, don't you? It's called mitigation. This area of space and certain other aspects within this review, I mean, it's mentioned this need to work with the private sector. But unless there is a complete mental shift as to how an economy should actually function, you are literally going to be in this forever rhetoric of the UK and the EU and the Vichy wankers constantly giving it all of that and then sticking the begging bowl out to the US. There is nothing coming from the European Union. There is nothing coming from the UK. As is best exemplified with that RAF information. And the fact that you can have a little fucking nation out in the middle of the Middle East, 14% of the population of the UK, far in advance of us. You've got Russia, that hasn't got even remotely the economy that we've got. 8 times the size. The incompetence around this is just mind-blowing. It really is. So obviously the main point in this episode, after the insult of that midget Macron this week, is how throughout these various stages of me looking at the situation that we've got and checking all of the legal excuses that they keep coming up with, on this absolute lie that they keep pushing on the public in order to be able to force this mass invasion that's taking place, whether it be via the dinghy boys or whether it be via the ones that I also identified, and that the illegals just being allowed to walk straight through at Charlie Boy's City Airport. It's not just the dinghy boys that are a problem. If we don't start to actually look at this stuff properly and stop relying on these silly bastards that keep coming out all over everybody's bloody influencer channel saying, oh, we've got to come out of the ECHR. I don't care if you come out of the ECHR. But that's got nothing to do with the problem that you're supposed to be solving, is it? Vichy boys are human trafficking, and they should be prosecuted for it. Now, I know your international law doesn't mean anything. You have to have your international rules-based system, which never actually applies. But if you actually bothered to have competent people in place and actually put the military where it was supposed to be, which is the defence of our nation, not some other fuckers, then maybe you could have something in the water to turn around and say, no, you will turn back. And Frenchie, you send another one into the shores and we'll send you something back. The old enemy is still proving to be the enemy. You take their bullshit lies and fake legal arguments and you shove it down their throats. Stop pussyfooting around. These so-called people, oh, I know exactly what the problem, I've got the solution. No, you haven't. You're just pissing around like every other idiot does. I also asked the basic question that because here's the part where somebody can have a bit of a go. I'm not a military man. I have never served in the military. I've had involvement with the military, but I am not a military man. There will definitely be serious issues that I'm not picking up on. And so it's actually beholden to those who do want to see the nation be able to fulfill its duties properly, and that do actually understand where we do have a problem, that they make their ideas known, that they make the situations known, and make it publicly known, or at least within the right circles. I have to be careful with saying publicly known that, because you can't give away information that would be compromising. I understand that. But let's see these military people and that come forward and go, yeah, this is a serious problem. These people don't know what they're doing. They don't know what they're talking about. These so-called, like that bloody idiot Baron or whatever his name is, and that's one of the people that signed off on this stupid document. Have people that understand that that guy is an incompetent arse. Bring the real story forward to the right people. Let it be known. Everything has to be done on a practical basis. It needs to be based on understanding our limitations, especially in the current system. And so any kind of solutions that are required need to actually have a proper, wider understanding. So if you understand what the military needs are, you understand what the economic needs are, and we understand if we can finally break through to people to understand command and control systems don't work, then you might actually be able to find the finance to be able to solve the problems of the military. Don't be dissuaded by this notion of, let's not bother because who are we fighting for anyway? Creating the answers are not for the people that are working against us. Creating the solutions, creating the answers are for those of us that will kick those bastards out. Now, as things stand, I think I'll probably need possibly 2 more parts to be able to complete the whole of this episode of the review. So ideally that'll be done before I have to leave for a short while, but I'll say more on that when it gets closer to the time. But yeah, if there are people out there that do understand how to actually do a proper military strategy review, You need to be working on that, and ideally, and have people that have across the forces to come together and say, well, how do you actually need to operate collectively? Who needs to have the information passed on to what? All these types of things. And then in addition to that, from the previous part, how many of our servicemen do actually need to be stationed in our overseas territories? Especially to make sure that they're not given away to anybody else again. Because that number that they put up and saying there was 8,500 of them, I mean, that's pitiful. I know the new fighting methods and that are not all about how many boots there are on the ground and all of the rest of it, but this is a bigger picture than that. And an awful lot of these bullshit systems that they keep going on about, when it really gets down to the nitty-gritty, no, it's not all about technology. There's more at hand here. So let's have the right people start having the right conversations, because this sure as shit, isn't it? So I think that'll do it for this episode. I'll try and get another one out in midweek. All right, cheers. See you later. Bye bye.